Right. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to the final talk of the 2023-2024 Ontario County Historical Society Virtual Winter Speaker Series. My name is Ben Falter, if any of you haven't tuned into one of these before, and I'm the Director of Education at the Historical Society in Canandaigua. And before I turn things over to our wonderful presenter, just a couple of very quick announcements. So, first of all, this entire speaker series has highlighted topics related to recreation to coincide with our current exhibit, Let's Go Have Fun, which is all about recreation in Ontario County from 1900 to 1965. So if you haven't visited the Historical Society while that exhibit's been open, it closes in April at the end of April. So make sure you come and check it out if you're in the Canandaigua area. And it will be making way for our next exhibit, which should be opening in late May or early June, which is all about photography. And you can find information about the Historical Society on our website, which is linked down in the description of this video. And thank you for tuning in this evening and for any of the other talks. If you have any questions or comments during this talk, please type them into the live chat, and I will make sure to pass them on to our speaker during the Q&A period at the end. But with that being said, let me introduce our speaker tonight. Tonight we have Chris Bensch. He is the Vice President of Collections at the Strong Museum in Rochester. I'm sure all of you have heard of the Strong Museum, but if you haven't, I am particularly thrilled to have Chris here with us tonight because I'm a former employee of the Strong Museum myself. The Strong houses the world's largest and most comprehensive collection of historical materials related to play. It is the home to the National Toy Hall of Fame, the National Archives of Game Show History, the World Video Game Hall of Fame, the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, the Brian Sutton Smith Library and Archives and Play, and many excellent world-class interactive exhibits related to all things play, and many, many more things that I have not mentioned. Chris himself has tons of experience studying and talking about play and playthings, which has included numerous appearances on the Travel Channel show Mysteries at the Museum, and countless interviews with many different media outlets, including Wired and, back in November, Good Morning America. So I will go ahead and hand things over to Chris.
And I'm going to have to make sure that you always do my introductions. Not that. So thank you all for being with me tonight. And I want to apologize if there's any coughing incidents on my part. I am hopefully nearing the end of a long upper respiratory ailment. So I've been saving my voice today for you all. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and switch over to my PowerPoint. So give me just a second here. All right, we are in business. So I am talking about toy design and what changes and what doesn't across the decades. That is something that the Strong Museum is uniquely qualified to talk about. From 19th century mass-produced toys to some of the latest ones that are hot under the Christmas tree or on birthday wish lists. And maybe you'll see some things in my presentation tonight that reverberate with you personally. So as Ben said, we are the world's biggest play museum. There's nothing like us anywhere else globally. So we've sort of staked out our territory. And we do that especially with currently more than 535,000 objects. Some of them very old, like this handmade doll from the early part of the 19th century, or things like a slingshot, something kids today probably wouldn't know if it fell out of a tree on them. And then we get into newer playthings, whether that's a Justin Bieber action figure set or more than 50,000 video games in our collection. We have icons from every era. So if you're thinking of the 50s, you might remember Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. Or from the 60s, there were the Archies who dominated the Saturday morning cartoon ghetto. 70s, every girl wanted to have hair like Farrah Fawcett on Charlie's Angels. And coming up closer to recent times, here's Hannah Montana as a doll. One of my favorite things to hear as I go through the museum's exhibit is people saying, I had one of those. And that kind of recognition is something that's very powerful. So the big question for tonight is, does play evolve? Has it changed since people moved out of caves and went to infinity and beyond with Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story? So I'm going to contend that in a lot of ways, the playthings may change, the materials may change, but often at the core, the play itself doesn't. And I hope that I can show you examples that make that resonate with you tonight. So one of the ongoing themes of every era in American history is kids emulating adults. They know what the grown-ups around them do. They want to pretend that they are like that. So in the 50s, you might have gotten a kitchen range like this one. Into the 60s, here's a lovely turquoise oven from Susie Homemaker. Or more recent times, here's an easy bake oven that essentially looks like mom and dad's microwave oven. Kids also want autonomy. They want to be able to do things themselves and not have the grown-ups bossing them around. This is one of my favorite play sets that would never make it past the legal department of any toy company today. So here's Gilbert. A.C. Gilbert made erector sets, most famously. Here is a glass blowing set, because what could go wrong? Open flames, molten glass, kids having fun. It is a liability nightmare from our perspective, but it was not exceptional at its time. A little safer, here's a cake pop set. It might add to your waistline, but you're probably not going to burn the house down as you make your cake pops. Kids also want to take on the world. I think that's one of the reasons that Tyrannosaurus Rex and other fierce dinosaurs are so popular with kids. They get bossed around all the time. They're small, basically powerless in a lot of ways. So toys play on that, whether it's a rapid fire cannon. This is from the early part of the 20th century from Milton Bradley, and it's basically a Gatling gun. And you're putting wooden bullets in there to mow down the toy soldiers in front of you. Or more recently, we've all, kids and grown-ups alike, have become enraptured by Nerf blasters that let you feel like you are in charge. You've got this safe, interesting, fun weapon to use, and all kinds of competitions and games can ensue. Kids also want play that's as real as possible. They want to feel like they are in the real world. So here's an example of one of the first dolls that has a face really modeled like an actual infant. It is something that really looks familiar and accurate. Sometimes things don't work out so perfectly. Here's one of the great examples of a dud toy in the Strong Museum's collection. This is Thomas Edison's talking doll. It was not up there with the phonograph or the incandescent light bulb or motion pictures in his inventions. It used a little gramophone in her chest. She was very expensive. She broke if you look at her crosswise. Kids hated her, adults hated her even more, and she was taken off the market in about 6 months. Or my favorite pooping toy from the 1980s, Baby Alive. Maybe you remember Drinking Wet dolls, but Baby Alive took that to a different level of bodily function. If you don't remember, you feed Baby Alive 3 different colors of food. She has disposable diapers, and she is generous enough to fill them for you so that you can change them, just like a real baby. Sometimes toys are shaped more by what parents want than what kids want. I received some of these for holidays and birthdays and always kind of faked a smile. Maybe you did the same. So here's a spelling toy that has you maneuvering letters around this oval. Or here's Alfie, a early sort of semi-computerized toy from Play School. Or getting up into more current technology, here's a Bratz laptop that's a lot more like what mom and dad might use to work from home. Identifiable characters are important to kids. So in the middle of the 19th century, the biggest bestseller in the United States was Uncle Tom's Cabin. And naturally, this being a capitalist society, there were spin-off products like this Eva St. Clair paper doll that you could buy with those famous characters from that best-selling novel. In the 50s, you might want to be like Charlton Heston, the centurion in Ben-Hur, and here's a helmet that would let you really feel like your bicycle was a chariot. Or in past decades, everybody has fallen in love with Harry Potter, and there's so many ways that manufacturers and toy makers have used Harry Potter as a reason for kids to get involved in that kind of play. Blockbuster hits also shape playthings. So in the middle of the 19th century, the biggest deal in the summer was when the circus came to town in your area. So if you wanted to have that kind of play, this is a very expensive set. Here's Barnum's Great Menagerie that let you have a zoo, a circus. It was something that so many kids would aspire to. And then more recently, we're all familiar with how in 1977, a little science fiction movie called Star Wars revolutionized the movie business and the toy business alike and showed movie producers that they could make more money selling ancillary products than they could even with the box office. So what changes across the decades? Well, for one thing, technology changes. Kids today probably wouldn't recognize this corded landline phone from the 1920s. They also might not recognize this music box that closely resembled a portable TV of the 1960s. I wanted to add some items to our toy cash register collection. So when I bought this Target toy cash register a couple years ago, I was impressed, stunned maybe, to find that it didn't come with any cash. It came with credit cards you swiped because that's the way kids know transactions happen. Materials also change. So from the 19th century, when cast iron was the dominant material, to the post-World War II period, when plastic really covers most of the world of toys, that's one of the big transitions in cost, in speed of production, in vibrancy of colors. All those things have characterized toys through basically the last 80 years. New media also emerged that generate toys and playthings and create impressions. So those of you who remember daily and Sunday newspapers, one of the big attractions for those was the funny pages, the comic strips that were in there. And one of the big characters in that in the later part of the 19th century was an Irish immigrant kid named the Yellow Kid, named for always wearing this weird long yellow nightshirt. But he was a hit. And of course, then there were Yellow Kid dolls that came out. Similarly, in the 1930s, when radio was the dominant medium, kids wanted to listen to daily programs with radio's Little Orphan Annie, which had cliffhangers every day. And your big hook was that you wanted to have a decoder badge that would let you figure out the secret code that Little Orphan Annie gave you at the end of each episode to tell you what's going to happen the following day. And there it is. You just had to save up your Ovaltine labels or liners to earn one of those. New marketing options came with new media. So here's television that really starts invading American homes in the 1950s. It brought with us programs like the marionette show Howdy Doody, which was one of the most successful children's programs of its time. And of course, that means you've got to have Howdy Doody board games. And now with television, you can reach kids directly in a way you never could before. Mr. Potato Head has a reputation for having been the first television advertised on a national basis toy. And it is the start of so much that follows. You'll notice here that there is no potato on Mr. Potato Head's body because this is the early era when you had to bring your own real potato to play with Mr. Potato Head, not a plastic potato. So let's look a little bit at the 1800s, the 19th century, and look at the shape of toys and playthings. Some of them were handmade. Those are really hard for the Strong Museum to acquire. They tend to wear out, they don't get saved, they don't have brand names, they don't have visible characters. So we are always thrilled when we can find even a few examples of these early handmade toys. As I said, cast iron was the dominant material for many, many toys in the 19th century. So just as you were getting a cast iron stove for your kitchen, you could get a cast iron toy stove for your child. This is incredibly accurate, perfectly to scale. Sometimes these are mistaken for salesmen's samples, but they are toys. Iron could do various things. This elephant is articulated. It has cord attaching its legs to its body so that it could seem to walk. And as I said, blockbuster hits started dominating the toy business beginning in the second half of the 19th century. There were also sort of multimedia toys. Here's a book that comes with paper dolls that then lets you play out the plot of that book. Today, it would be a comic book or a movie or a television series that would generate this kind of plaything, but print was the way it happened back then. Celebrities show up on toys. The famous singer Jenny Lind, who is known as the Swedish Nightingale, shows up as a paper doll. So does the celebrity General Tom Thumb. Buffalo Bill, with his Wild West show, takes on the world in this board game from Parker Brothers. And sometimes there were journalists. So here's Nellie Bly, a real female groundbreaking journalist who concluded that she was going to go around the world faster than that famous character Phineas Fogg in Around the World in 80 Days. And she did indeed do that. Now, it didn't hurt that when she got to San Francisco heading back to New York, her newspaper had chartered a train to take her cross country more rapidly than she would if she had just bought a ticket. And sports characters also show up on playthings. There's educational toys. Alphabet blocks are one of the big ones in the 19th century. Maybe you want to teach children to draw. This one uses stencils to teach artwork. And Alphabet blocks could also have pictures on the sides that would make them even more compelling to play with stories that went along with the letters on top. Long before Lincoln logs were invented in the early 20th century, here's a log cabin playhouse that you can build. And manufacturers always want you to buy more. So they developed the technique of having the basic starter set. But if you're really lucky, you can persuade your parents or grandparents to get you the super duper deluxe version. Toys also reflect the reality that children know. So when you're going to a one-room schoolhouse, this set at the upper left is basically what you would know from your school experience. Similarly, in your small town or even in a big city, you saw horse-drawn delivery wagons like this one at the lower right, and that's what you wanted to play with. Making values fun. So I'm not sure having William Tell shoot coins off of his son's head is going to inspire me to save for the future, but parents are always trying to get across those messages. I definitely would not want to do it with this scary clown who actually eats the coins. Social gaming is part of play. So, party games is a theme that runs through portions of the Strong Museum's holdings. We're familiar with pin the tail on the donkey, but here you also pin the slipper on Cinderella. I'm rather interested that the clunky boots that she's wearing looks like very fashionable Uggs from today. And we jokingly call this pin the tail game pin the peanuts on the pachyderm. It's an elephant, the symbol of the Republican Party, and you are trying to pin bags of peanuts onto it. Licensed characters at the end of the 19th century make their debut and become big money makers. One of the most popular sets of children's books and stories involved the brownies, these little elfin characters. And the brownies had got into all sorts of adventures. That led in turn, of course, to brownie toys, things like brownie scroll puzzles, basically what we would call a jigsaw puzzle. And because the brownies were so well known, George Eastman paid for the rights to use the Brownie brand on his simplest, cheapest, kid-friendly camera, the Kodak Brownie. Handheld devices are nothing new. This one, Pigs in Clover, was infamous in the last quarter of the 19th century. It's basically a dexterity game, and you're trying to maneuver those balls, the quote pigs, into their sty in the center. It's harder than it looks, and it had a reputation for bringing the work of Congress to a total standstill as senators and representatives played with pigs in clover. And where there's a success, there's a knockoff. So Pigs in Clover was the initial big hit. So other people turned out products like Cows in the Corn. It's the same game, just not with the same name. We want simulations of things that we can't necessarily do. So can't muster a football team. Here's a way to play parlor football in bad weather or with just a couple of you with this board game. Another version, I'm struck by how there are no protective helmets or other pads on these football players. It was a lot more dangerous game back then. If you prefer horse racing, here's Saratoga Steeplechase. Or if you're a baseball fan, here's a version of that as well. So we get into the first half of the 20th century. Here's an example of a persistent and an enduring children's plaything, the toy tea set. I am constantly boggled why kids find this alluring because I don't know of any parents who have tea parties, But kids over and over want to do that with their dolls, their stuffed animals, with their friends. I think it may be part of just children's folk culture that they pass down from one generation to another. As time moves along, kids want the latest transportation. They don't want horse-drawn wagons. They want automobiles. They want wind-up airplanes. They want mechanical toys like this very fancy Ferris wheel that you could wind up and operate. Or here's Mark's Merrymakers. This isn't Mickey Mouse. They didn't have rights to that at this point, but it's a wind-up toy with a piano, plays music, the figures move. It would have been really impressive, very impressive technology for its time. Another version of that, this time with the characters from the Little Abner comic strip. Or famous movie star Charlie McCarthy, or radio star Charlie McCarthy in a wind-up vehicle. Hollywood stars have a place in the toy world, whether that's Grace Kelly or Norma Shearer from earlier in the 20th century. Both of these are paper doll sets. And speaking of Walt Disney, he was brilliant at licensing and leveraging his characters. Nobody else had ever done that to the degree and the degree of expertise that he did with characters like Mickey Mouse or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And the world of Disney keeps on going, powered by lots of licensed products, whether that's pull toys with Pinocchio or Mickey Mouse. Construction toys are also an enduring type of plaything. So this is a toy brick set that lets you build pretty elaborate buildings. Here's a similar block set. These are kind of terracotta blocks that you could make a bridge in this instance. Not quite as big as what's on the illustration. One of the big brands was the Erector set. It was known as the toy that lets you make more toys. And it was a huge success for many years, creating young engineers and architects with bolting these girders together in all kinds of ways. There were motors you could add, various different added features if you paid for the extra deluxe versions. What's interesting to me is these building sets are not so gender biased as many of the sets today. There's the assumption that both boys and girls will want to do it. So here's another one, 1931. Brother and sister are playing side by side with the same toy. It's not for one, it's not for the other, it's for both of them. Standardization made profitability more possible. The Marx Toy Company was known for taking basic designs, changing the colors a little bit, and selling more copies. It didn't take a lot of work, didn't take re-engineering of the toy, and it basically let them produce multiple variations and keep selling those, keep turning a profit. Safety concerns do rear their heads. Here's a dart game that is sort of like Velcro. What's on the dartboard are little points sticking out like the rough side of a piece of Velcro. And those darts, those feathers with a ball on the end, that ball is soft wax that then would stick on those points on the dartboard. So, as it says at the bottom, a home amusement without harm or danger. A little more dangerous, another Gilbert product that you are making balloons with molten rubber. So it says simply dip the form in liquid rubber and dry. Sanitary and fireproof. I think it's worrisome that you even have to say fireproof on the product. Speaking of fireproof, Lionel, the maker of toy trains, in the early 1930s turned out this very realistic, large-scale toy stove and oven. It was so realistic and so expensive as a toy that landlords sometimes bought it for apartments or rooming houses. Changing standards. This would never pass the bar today. So here's candy pills for all ills. What messages are you conveying to your children? The first one on the right, take 2 after brushing your teeth, because what else do you want but sugar in your child's mouth? Take 1 after stubbing a toe. Take 3 for helping mother. I don't know what that does for you. Take 2 on rainy days when you're feeling gloomy. This is a recipe for drug abuse, as far as I'm concerned. Durability is something that characterizes loads of toys. We think of toys often as almost expendable, but toys like wagons, whether it's a radio flyer or this Lindy flyer named after Charles Lindbergh, were ones that would really endure over the years and get passed down from child to child. This is an extra deluxe wagon with actual headlights, battery powered. Scooters were also durable and enduring. It's interesting to look at some of these playthings and games and see how the graphics are characteristic of their time. I think this is a very clever craft kit. It's called the Scissors Book, and on the cover is this figure made out of a pair of scissors. This is very much sort of modern art of the 1950s, this game called Carte Blanche. Or for a deco look, here's a game called Flying the United States Airmail. And one from closer, right here in Rochester, is the original game of Zoom, also with a very Art Deco feel to its design. Metal takes new forms. It's not cast iron. It is formed and stamped tin, like this miniature golf course. Or this bingo game. But in the years after World War II, plastic infiltrates the toy business. It takes over very rapidly. And it allowed you to have things like this baby toy, this weighted rock 'em over kind of toy. Getting into the 1950 to now period, realism remains something that's popular with kids. One of the really selling power of the Tonka truck line was that it looks so much like the real thing. And sometimes the advertising pictures of those trucks, if all was done to proper scale, you could hardly tell them from the real thing. Here's a toy kitchen, again, from the 1950s into the 60s, and it's so realistic. It even has water that would come out of the sink. This coffee maker is essentially like what the drip coffee maker that mom and dad might have in the kitchen, or a Hoover vacuum cleaner for kids that looks identical to one that I owned a few years ago. Found objects continue to be something, as I said, they're hard to find. There's things that we're really grateful to encounter. And some of them are, again, really expendable. The cardboard box is in our National Toy Hall of Fame, and kids love cardboard boxes. They think they are a great plaything, as these 3 very happy kids are proving. Interactive media was something new in the 1950s in a different way. There was a CBS television show called Winky Dink and You, and it was interactive in that it was animated, and you ordered one of these sets that was essentially a sheet of cellophane that you put on your TV screen. And then Winky Dink would come to a valley and need a bridge drawn over the valley. So that's what you were to do on your piece of cellophane. Trouble was, kids didn't always remember to put the piece of cellophane on their new television screen, and mom and dad were not very happy with markers on that new RCA. So Winky Dink did not stay on the air very long. We all know that technology changes so rapidly. What seems up to date rapidly seems so outdated. So here's TV bingo or VCR charades. These have very short shelf lives. Or Teddy Ruxpin, who seemed incredibly advanced when he came out and could read books to you via cassette tapes. Now, in this era, in the most recent era, gender roles are often more strongly reinforced than they were in the first half of the 20th century. So when Lego wanted to sell systems to kids, to girls, they made it pastel like this one. Or they made them more about relationships than about building. I am delighted and horrified by the gender roles on this box cover for Battleship. Dad and son are having a great time playing Battleship in the living room or the dining room, and mom and sis are happily doing the dishes back there in the kitchen and watching their menfolk have a good time. Similarly, here's a career game. This came in a boys version and a girls version. If you got the girls version, you were pretty limited in what you could be: a ballerina, a stewardess, a school teacher, a model, a nurse, or an actress. That's not a very wide spectrum of things to aspire to. Brand extensions are things that we're very familiar with. So when Slinky was a hit, if they want to sell more products, we're going to turn Slinky not just from a spring, we're going to turn it into a seal, or we're going to take Play-Doh and let you pretend that you're a dentist. Dr. Drill and Fill with this character with Play-Doh teeth. Shared mechanisms let manufacturers have efficiencies of engineering and cost. So the first really cost-effective and select and successful talking doll was Chatty Cathy from Mattel in the 1960s. And they used that same mechanism, which involved a pull cord with a ring, for games like this Animal Talk game. It's the same technology. They've just repurposed it. One of the great failures of the toy business in the second half of the 20th century. In 1956, Lionel decided they wanted to sell trains to girls in a way that they never had been able to reach before. So they produced what they called the Lady Lionel set, which had a pink locomotive and a lilac coal car and a baby blue caboose, and girls hated it. They hated it. If they wanted a train, they wanted a train that looked like a real train, not this funny pastel thing. It was infamous for being a total disaster. And the story is that shop owners took these toys into the back room and sprayed them with black paint because they were identical to the boys' versions. They were just in weird color, and then sold those. We got a set from a girl who received it as a gift, never used. There are bad ideas in the toy world. A few years ago for April Fool's Day, we did an exhibit called What Were They Thinking? About bad ideas. Sometimes it's a character like Amy Carter that is not going to really sell off the shelves. Or here's the harmless fun of a dynamite blaster. Health and safety take different forms. How about encouraging your children to save money by paying for candy cigarettes out of this cigarette dispenser? And another infamous safety hazard, the Riveton toy from Parker Brothers. It was essentially like a Erector set out of plastic, and they were coupled not with little nuts and bolts. Excuse me, but with rivets that you basically shot through them. And what kids discovered in a matter of seconds is that they could terrorize their little siblings or the cat, and Parker Brothers took it off the market in less than 6 months. Excuse me. Toys that we might not choose. So when a atomic energy was a new and wonderful thing. Here's a Westinghouse atomic power plant model you can build. Here's a good concept, a miniature erector set. But the pocket erector is a name that would never pass muster with any fifth grade class. It makes me wonder who was at the conference table at Gilbert when they named this product. Plastic, as I say, has dominated the toy world, allowing elaborate toys like this mousetrap or Rock'em Sock'em robots. Tippet is another dexterity game. Or Hats Off that has you launching plastic hats. Technology keeps advancing. So here's a very basic mathematics toy that uses the same technology as the old switchboards, telephone switchboards, where you're connecting two different electric wires. It gets more elaborate with computers, with a magic wand that reads barcodes, with a talking family house, or with Poochie, the robotic dog. And one of the most famous technology games early on was the game of Simon, that has you playing essentially a game of Simon Says, following the colors and sounds on these 4 buttons on your Simon disc. Culture shapes the era, shapes the playthings. Here's a ring toss game making fun of President Richard Nixon. Or Clintonopoly, when the Clintons were not popular with everyone. Or a George W. Bush Jack in the Box that plays Hail to the Chief. Strong has unique resources about making toys, designing toys. We have examples from designers showing their models, showing their drawings. And some of these toys would come to production, others never would. We have prototypes. This is a sand grabber that would ultimately become the model for Hungry Hungry Hippos. Another prototype. There's a prototype for G.I. Joe. It's basically a standard model Ken doll who's had his hair cut a little more butched up. He's had more hollow cheeks, and he was proof of concept for Hasbro before they actually started making G.I. Joe with a handmade sailor's outfit. Here's another less famous prototype for a Goonie Bird game. So these works from toy designers and manufacturers help us document the kind of imaginative process behind creating a toy or game. There are presentation prototypes that are early forms that have sold concepts. Here's a game called Backseat Drawing that eventually became a big success. And here's a game that was originally called Apples to Oranges that became Apples to Apples in the final production. This may look really horrifying, but it is the skin for a line of toy bears that were called VIBs, very important bears. And here's Marilyn Monroe. We also have examples of ways of getting people invested in these toys, member clubs like these for the Muffy Vanderbeer group. We also have advertising that represents how toy manufacturers were showing off their toys to retailers and consumers. Here's an ad for Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head, back from that era when you needed a potato, or a very streamlined version of a rocking horse. But Slinky is hard to sell without seeing it actually work. So here's a plug-in demonstration device that has Slinky actually doing that Slinky thing. We also have more than 100 years of Playthings magazine, the main business journal for the toy industry that helps us track what was out there. So whether that's baby dolls, whether it's new Mickey Mouse and Disney products, whether that's growing diversity, when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball and would go on to be a toy like this. Wagons, big wheels, all these are revealing in their advertising as well as the products. And we have a toy catalog collection, more than 70,000 of these. These were primarily called trade catalogs. They were what manufacturers sent to toy retailers to get them to stock their products. So they're really revealing of what was out there. But we also have consumer products, consumer catalogs, like the Sears Wish Book that children of a certain generation dog-eared the heck out of as they tried to prompt their parents to buy them great toys. Etch-a-Sketch in advertising and catalogs, Hula Hoop as it's promoting itself during the peak of that craze. Here you see the realism of those Tonka trucks in 1966. And it also lets us efficiently document the entire product range. We may have Mr. Potato Head, but here's an ad, catalog page that shows off his other friends, Pete the Pepper, Oscar the Orange, Katie the Carrot, and the like. Or the whole range of radio flyer wagons. Some of them, as you see in the center bottom, actually blue instead of the iconic red. We also collect personal stories about playing. So here we have Jerome at 2 years old on his basically Fred Flintstone style pedal vehicle. Here's kids who thought the Pottery Barn box that their grandparents got was the best thing ever. They actually took it home on top of mom and dad's minivan at the end of their time with grandma and grandpa. It's revealing to see people playing, what they're doing, whether that's with dolls, whether that's with things like a cowboy outfit or play sets or a chemistry set. Of course, kids don't always follow instructions. You're not supposed to do this with a slinky, but kids do it, and it's great to know that this kind of play happens. So whatever your age, whatever your favorite plaything, I hope that I've prompted some memories of those and some understanding of where the playthings that are so significant to us today have come from, and maybe a sense of where they'll go in the future. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I don't want to stress out your voice too much longer. Are you okay to take a question or two?
I am. I'm willing to try.
Okay. Well, I'll start you off with a fun starter question I got. And folks in the chat, if you haven't already typed in a question to send in, go ahead and send it in. The chat lags a few, like 30 seconds or so behind us, so they'll catch up in a minute here. But I'll start off with a fun one that I have here. Do you have a favorite item or artifact in the Strong Museum's collection?
I am really fond of our original Monopoly board from inventor Charles Darrow. It was the prototype that he made for his family, and it is the one that ignited the Monopoly craze that took over the world in 1933 and 1934. It was terrible to one degree that he was stealing the idea from a woman game inventor in the early part of the 20th century, but it is the iconic American board game, and it is great to have that very first one in our possession.
Yeah, that one is really cool. If the folks watching, if you haven't been to the Strong Museum and seen that artifact, definitely go see it. It's really cool. Not going to spoil it, but it is a shape you might not expect to find a Monopoly board in. a question here. You talked about tea sets and sort of tea parties as being part of like a children's folk culture. Are there any other examples that come to mind in terms of like children's folk culture and folk ways, and what do we understand about children's folk culture like in general?
It's hard to capture that because children aren't known for writing things down necessarily.
Right.
So one thing I remember from my childhood is jump rope jingles.
Mm,
So nobody had a book of jump rope jingles,
yeah.
and I still have synapses in my brain that are occupied by ones like Doctor, Doctor, call the nurse. Here comes the lady with the alligator purse that
Yeah.
was very hot on sidewalks in my neighborhood in the
Mm,
1960s. So those are the kinds of things that are hard to document, that get passed child to child, generation to generation, whether that's going through a school class or a family. But those are fascinating when you can sort of tease those out and document them.
yeah. Um, why did gender roles become so much more pronounced in toys and playthings as you move into the later half of the 20th century?
I blame Toys R Us for part of that. Is
Okay.
they're having a boys area and a girls area. And if you
Ah.
fell between the stools on those, you didn't have a zone for your toy to go in. So if you remember Toys R Us, if you went into the
Uh-huh.
girls area, it was overwhelmingly pink, even when Barbie wasn't involved.
Hmm. Interesting. That makes sense. I I'll leave you with one last question here, so you can rest your voice.
All right.
Why do you believe studying and understanding play and its history is so important?
It's something that all of us do.
Yeah.
With any luck, we do it all our life. It forms who we are. It's restorative at every age. It allows us to socialize. I would feel very awkward saying to someone, why don't you come over and we'll sit around for 3 or 4 hours? But if I'm inviting them to play a game, whether that's cards or Settlers of Catan,
Yeah.
that gives a structure for that kind of playful socializing.
Yeah.
So those kinds of dynamics are so powerful. And as I mentioned, people of every age come through the Strong Museum and exclaim, I had one of those.
Yeah.
And it's something that is very near to their hearts. And they often haven't thought of it in years. So it's something I had somebody say to me at one point, why are there all these airplane museums? Only a few people care about aviation, but all of us have played. All of us have been kids. All of us, I hope, play in different ways right down to our last years. So it's just a big, spacious, useful topic. And
Yeah.
frankly, it's one that cultivates joy in
Yeah.
people of every age. So I'm pleased to be able to help with that.
Well, great. Chris, thank you so much for soldiering on through your respiratory illness. We'll give your voice a break. And folks, thank you all for tuning in. If you want to watch the video playback of this talk, you can access it with the same link that you used to tune in tonight. But for now, we will say goodbye. And thanks for joining us for this speaker series, and hope you'll join us next year for our third speaker series. So have a good night, everybody.